Hello and welcome. I am Professor QA, and in this tutorial we're going to be reviewing the Postman application, specifically the collection runner feature. We're going to be giving a tutorial on how to use the collection runner feature and how it is useful in your quality assurance testing. If you find this tutorial useful, be sure to check me out on Instagram or Facebook at professor.qa. You can just do a search on Instagram or Facebook at professor.qa and check out all my tutorials and videos and discussions to help you out in your quality assurance career. Okay, so in this tutorial, we will be going over the Postman collection runner feature, and this assumes you're already familiar with the basic functions of Postman. You've already used Postman to test API endpoints before, and that you're already familiar with testing API endpoints in general. You're familiar with how to send data to the endpoints and what the expected results are of those tests. If you're not familiar with those, be sure to check out some of our other tutorials on the basics of Postman and getting comfortable with testing API endpoints using the Postman application. And also you can review our software design tutorial, where it talks about how API endpoints are used in the software development lifecycle and the software design, so you can get comfortable with what to expect from those API endpoints. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we have our Postman opened up here, and in this environment we have one API endpoint that we're going to be tested, and it accepts a get, a post, and a delete. So our post inserts a new person. Here we're just recording a first name and a last name for this demo. We're making it relatively easy. Just accepts a first name and a last name. Both parameters are required, and both parameters must be between 1 and 20 characters. It does not accept exclamation points or number signs. A lot of those special characters must be removed. So it has a few requirements around the first name and the last name. And then we have our get, where we can submit this and get back all the tests that we've run. You can see here that we do have an array of several tests that we've ran in the past. And then this delete just deletes all of those records, and then your get would come back with 0 records, and it makes it real easy to restart all of your testing all over again. So in this example, we're going to run a couple of tests manually so we can see how we would test this manually, and then compare that to how we would set it up in the runner to be much faster. Okay, so in this example, let's get started here. We're just going to run Benjamin test, and we expect this to return a 201. So we have our testing set up here, and we just have one real quick, easy test to test that the status code is a 201 when we submit this. So let's submit it, and as expected, we get back the unique ID of that newly inserted record, and it returns a 201. So if we look in our tests here, the test name is test save was committed. We're expecting a status code of 201. That is the name of the test. And it did pass because we had a 201. Okay, so now let's say we need to run another test, and we're going to test that the first name being blank does return a 400. A 400 is going to tell us that this was poorly formatted or it's missing a required field, and we expect to get back a 400. So now here we're going to run our next test. And indeed, we get back a message saying that it was an error inserting the person. The first name is required, and our test did pass. We were expecting a status code of 400. Actually, this should have been titled differently. Test save was not committed. We should have named it a little different, but not a big deal. 400, so our test did pass. We got back a 400 bad test. Okay, so as you can see, manually testing this is rather time-consuming. And as you can see, it's pretty easy to make a mistake. I should have renamed that test to test save was not committed. All right, so that's how we would test it manually. And in the real world, where you may have several different parameters, you might have 10 or 20 different parameters. Each of them have requirements around them. So you may have 40 different test cases to run on this one API endpoint, and it's getting rather time-consuming to do so. All right. That's where the collection runner comes in, is the ability to run many different test cases back to back, all saved in a spreadsheet all at once. And then your spreadsheet is saved so that if an update is made later on, you can rerun that regression test all over again in just a matter of moments instead of having to rerun all of these manually once again. So let's see how we would update this in order to run the collection runner. In order to do that, we must update, we make a slight update to our body here. We make a slight update to our tests, and we create a data file to submit to this collection runner. So first things first, let's create that data file. So I'm going to open this up for us here. I have a data file set up, and you can see we have a column for each of the parameters that we need. We need a first name parameter and a last name parameter to pass in. And then these are for the tests. Here we're going to update our test here to add in the expected status code and a test name as a variable, as a parameter that we can pass in. And we are expecting, you'll notice some of these we expect to work, to have a 201, and then there are several instances here where we're expecting a 400 to come back. And for it not to save, where we pass in special characters, we expect it not to save, and we expect a 400 instead. Okay, and then for each one of these, this is a test case that we would run. So here, this would submit Benjamin Bruner to the API endpoint. We would expect to get back a 201, and this is just a friendly name for that test case. Next, we would test our lower boundary limit, one single character. B Bruner, we would expect to work at 201, and here's a friendly test name. And then so on and so on, all the way down through each one of these. And we set up this spreadsheet as a CSV. That is important. It does need to be saved as a CSV. There are a few other formats Postman does accept, but I found CSV to be the easiest for me. All right, so that is how our spreadsheet is set up. Next thing we need to do is update our body to accept these parameters. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger for us so that's easier to see. And in Postman, to set these up, you put in 2 curly braces. And you'll notice Postman recognizes that that is a parameter that you're passing in from a data file, and it color codes it orange and italicizes it for us. That's real handy. We're going to do the same thing with the last name. And last name. So now when Postman runs this, it's going to substitute the value here, Benjamin, for the first name. So it's going to take this entire thing here and substitute that with Benjamin, and it's going to do the same thing with the last name, Bruner. And then it's going to run the next iteration and substitute B in first name, and then Bruner in last name. And so on and so on. It's going to run through each one of these test cases, and these parameters will be replaced. All right? Next thing we need to do is we need to do the same thing for the test. Since every single one is not the same, where some are 200, some are 400, we need to update this to read from the spreadsheet as well. And in order to do that, I have a real quick copy paste here for myself. And this is going to be easier to read if I stretch it out for us. Okay, so now you'll see here, we have this piece, this portion right here says Postman get the iteration data. That's my spreadsheet. Go into the spreadsheet, my iteration data, and get test name. And same thing here. You'll notice it says Postman from the iteration data, my spreadsheet, get expected status code. And then the test will run, and it'll expect it to have a status. Once again, get the value out of the spreadsheet for expected status code. And don't worry if you're not super familiar with how to write these tests. You can go to learning.postman.com, and they have tons of examples on how to write these tests and how to get the data out of your spreadsheet to use in your test as variables. So check that out if you're not familiar with how to use the Postman language here in order to get that. So now our post is ready to go. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save it. That is very important. You do want to save it before you run a collection runner. Every update you need to make, you need to save. Okay, now we are all set. Our body has been updated, our tests have been updated, and our spreadsheet here, our CSV file, is ready to go. Okay, so I'm going to close this for us and save whatever changes we may have made. All right, so now let's open up our runner. And you'll notice it opens up our collection runner, and it asks us which of the endpoints do we want to run. So you'll notice our folders here are the same. And we only want to run the post. This is really only designed to run the post. And we don't have an environment selected in our demo. We're just using one single environment. And we're going to select our file. So this is the file that we were just modifying, our CSV file. And you'll notice it recognizes right out of the gates that it has 19 rows in there. And we'll view our spreadsheet again. You'll notice the first row is the parameter names. That is always the case. And then we have 19 rows in here that we want to run. Okay, so that looks good. It recognized that it is a text CSV. I do want to save the responses. That makes it easier for me if there's any errors that occur. Being able to view the responses is very helpful. And we are all set up and ready to run. So let's run. And you'll notice out of the 19, 17 of those tests have passed, 2 have failed. So let's go check these out. In the post, since we saved the responses, you can see real easily here the response body returned 28, so that was record number 28 that was inserted, and you can review the headers and the request. This is very helpful. Oops, this request URL, that is really helpful, and the request body is super helpful. You'll notice instead of the first name and the last name placeholders, it substituted the value from the spreadsheets. So that is really helpful for us. And let's go look at the 2 that have failed. So here you'll recognize that we have the red icons and red coloring indicating that it failed. And let's look at what was returned. That is, the response body is what was returned. You notice it says a message and then has all this message information here for us. And we can look at the friendly name, test JSON, first name. We expected a status code of 400. That was the name of the test. And the assertion error, we told it that it expected to get a 400, except it got a 500 error. Okay? Well, in our requirement, in these mock requirements that we put together, we should never really return a 500. We should have gotten a 400. So this tells us real easily that we need to submit a bug for this. We expected a 400. We expected a 400, but we got a 500. Let's create a bug. All right. So that is super easy. We would submit that bug, the developers would go update it, and then when we need to rerun this after the update, we would simply go back to our collection. We would say all this would already be saved. We would go back to our collection runner. Again, we're only testing the post. We would select our file that we have, the same 19 iterations. We would want to save our responses, and we would run it again. Obviously, developers in this demo have not updated anything, so we would get the exact same results. But you'll see how easy it is to use the collection runner to retest everything and run those same scenarios all over again after the updates have been made. So that is how we would use the collection runner. That's super useful for sharing between QA team members and rerunning scenarios, doing your regression testing, and running lots of different test cases all at once, back to back, and saves a lot of time over manual testing. Okay, well that is our tutorial on the Postman collection runner feature, and we demonstrated today how the collection runner is great for saving time over manual testing, particularly when you have a lot of test cases to run, and saves considerable amounts of time for regression and retesting API endpoints. If you found this tutorial useful, be sure to check us out on Instagram or Facebook. You can do a search for @professor.qa, and you can find us. There we have other tutorials and past videos that we have done. And on the Facebook discussion group, you can join other software testers and collaborate and share knowledge on our Facebook page. And you can even request demos if you have specific software or questions that you need answered about software testing. Be sure to check out our Facebook group and request a demo, and we'd be happy to help you out there.